Welcome to Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston, PhD. Glenn has held his doctorate in psychology for more than 30 years and is also a former multi-million-dollar consultant to the big food industry and uses his experience to help you defeat your cravings. This show will help you to focus on dramatically reducing cravings and leave the diet mentality behind, so you can more easily and effortlessly achieve your health, fitness, and body composition goals. Please remember, no doctor-patient relationship is created via this show, and you are responsible for confirming any changes to your diet, health, or psychological routines with an appropriately licensed professional before implementing them. Now, before we get started, if you haven't yet downloaded the free smartphone app to access dozens of these recordings all in one place, as well as to avail yourself of a confidential community for support, motivation, and assistance, please visit the podcast link on defeatyourcravings.com as soon as possible. And now, here's your host, Dr. Glenn Livingston.
Hey, this is the very good Dr. Glenn Livingston, and I'm here with
Howard Jacobson of Plant Yourself and Sick to Fit.
I always think you're going to say the evil Dr. Howard Jacobson.
I'm so sorry. He's never available.
He's busy doing evil things.
Yeah, he doesn't keep his word.
I know. Well, today you proposed a really interesting talk. Should I let you introduce it?
Yeah, so one of the things that I love is that it empowers us to exercise free will. And when people are binging, very often they feel like they have no choice, they have no agency, they feel like giving up, and they're looking at themselves wondering, why can I not keep my word to myself? Why am I a puppet on the string of this food or whatever the compulsion is? Give people back free will to say, okay, that every fiber of my being wants to eat this cheeseburger or donut or whatever, and I can exercise free will in that moment and say no, which is a beautiful, empowering thing. It obviously helps us achieve these meaningful goals. What I'm curious about, though, is sometimes I'll talk to clients and they will tell me, you know, I had this rule, I wasn't going to eat in the evening, and I got home and I had a desire to eat in the evening, and I remembered the rule, and I thought about it, and I decided to eat anyway. Part of me is like, whoa, they sinned. We have to fix this. And part of me also felt it sounds like they actually exercised free will even in that moment, and maybe that's okay, or maybe that's fine, or maybe that's a victory. And I'm curious as to your thoughts.
I have so many thoughts, and I do think it's a small victory along the road towards planned eating. I think of the goal being to look at your dangerous food intersections only, not every bite that you take, but the places where you get in trouble, and shift from impulsive emotional eating to like intellectually planned and pre-decided eating, rules-based eating, and we're in those difficult areas. I call that a conscious pig party, and I think that it tends to be part of everyone's recovery. Just about everyone. I mean, I've had some people who said, I read the book, I made one rule, I never made a mistake again. What happened to me with my free will when I discovered that I could make a rule and stick to it was not that I immediately stuck to my rule all the time. I wish I could say it was. What happened to me was the eradication of the feeling of powerlessness. There's this notion in our culture, especially in the treatment modalities, especially in the 12-step programs, that we're powerless over these impulses and we can't quit even if we want to. The best we could do is abstain one day at a time, but only if we turn over our will, only if we attend all these meetings and have sponsors and kind of think of ourselves like dependent little children who aren't capable of exercising free will for the rest of our lives. I think that that's the cardinal sin in overeating. I think that the belief that you don't have free will, I mean, it's the age-old devil made me do it argument, right? And you can't really have a society if people believe that the devil can make you do it, right? If the devil can make you do it, then we can't hold people responsible for their actions. We can't assume that people are capable of behaving in responsible ways and treating each other with respect and kindness and love. In a devil made me do it society, we are subjects of anarchy, we are slaves to our impulses, and real freedom doesn't exist. I remember Jack Trimpey saying that, look, this country fought wars for its freedom, isn't it horrific that we've adopted a philosophy that gives it up? I think that the notion that free will doesn't exist when it comes to food choice or drug choice or alcohol choice, I think that's very pernicious and dangerous. So I do view it as progress when people recognize that they have free will in the moment, and I wouldn't want to take that away from them, even if I could. So I always tell them, it's not something I do to you. It's not a treatment. It's not like a gastric bypass or a pill I give you to take away your cravings. It's information and guidance about how you can restore your free will. What happened to me was that I recognized that I did have free will. So I was no longer as frightened as I used to be. I used to be very, very frightened during an overeating episode, like something was happening to me, almost like I was possessed or something by this irresistible force. And there was no me there, and it made me feel smaller and at the mercy of triggers, quote unquote triggers. It would feel like, well, I can't pass by a chocolate bar because I'm going to have to eat the chocolate bar. Mm-hmm. I can't go into the supermarket and check out because there's this dark chocolate with almonds and sea salt bar that I just couldn't resist all the time. What happened to me was that I realized that it was me making the choices. It would wake me up at those moments of temptation and impulse and give me those extra microseconds to make that choice of my own accord. Sometimes I chose the right thing, sometimes I chose the wrong thing, but that was better than when I always chose the wrong thing automatically. And then I recognized that because I had free will, I also had the ability to choose a lower bar if I needed to. Like, nobody was making these rules for me. Why don't I make rules that I could actually follow? And I decided that if I made following the rules paramount, more so than losing weight, more so than looking a particular way, more so than getting my triglycerides to a certain number at a certain point, if I made following the rules paramount, then I would have this power to empirically adjust my rules until I achieved what I wanted to. I decided the most important thing was that I came up with rules that I wanted to follow. And I started to think of myself like the founders of the United States drafting the Constitution. What was this world that I wanted to live in? And what world could I live in where I actually would follow the rules? And then slowly but surely, I started exercising my free will more. I also found it was like a muscle. The more I got up and tried, the better I got at it. You know, it's not that I never made a mistake, but I was pretty darn close and I got better.
A lot to unpack there. First thing is, I have to tell you, I think the Electoral College was a big mistake. So I wish you hadn't done that. So one thing that comes up for me is that one of the prerequisites for free will is presence, awareness, consciousness, so that you can't exercise free will if you're not aware of yourself in the moment, if you're not present, if you're not in the present experience and aware that you are a person with a mouth and hands and choices. So if you do eat the wrong thing in that moment, for how many years were you and I eating the wrong thing and then having a stomach ache later or gaining weight or having bad numbers or feeling bad and not tying it to that moment where we could have done something about it? It's just like I have this, the end of my driveway, it's sort of a long country road and people drive fast. So it's a good idea to, when I get to the end of the driveway, to stop and look both ways. And on the left side of the driveway, as we're pulling out, there's a crepe myrtle tree. And anyone who knows anything about crepe myrtles knows that it would take 4 atomic bombs to kill one. You can cut them down, you can try to dig them out, you can take sawzalls and drills into the roots. They're going to come back. So the crepe myrtle keeps growing and it blocks my view of oncoming traffic from the left. And when it gets bad, I'm like driving out of the driveway and I have to slow down a lot, really take care. And I always think to myself, boy, I really need to take care of that crepe myrtle. I need to cut it down. But when I'm in my car about to leave my house is not the time to think that.
Yeah.
And the times when I'm at home and I'm walking down to, say, to get the mail from the mailbox, I could easily take a Clippers, but I don't think about it then. There's a complete lack of linkage between the moment when I'm suffering from a decision or a lack of a decision and when I have the power to make it. And I feel like even, losing, eating the cheeseburger, in that moment and deciding to do it and being present for it means that when I have the stomach ache, it's much easier to link it back to that moment and do a kind of a learning the same way you'd learn not to touch the hot stove.
This is very true. To solve that problem, because I have a lot of ideas while I'm driving, I figured out how to link Siri to my to-do application. And so I can just say, hey Siri, add blank, blank, blank in Todoist. And it winds up in my to-do list, and that way I've captured that idea at the moment. David Allen says the mind is a fantastic place for having ideas, but it's not a great place for holding ideas. So I've become accustomed to capturing all the ideas that I have, and then I sort them out later.
Yeah. When I'm suffering after a binge, to say, okay, I'm going to connect this moment to the moment when I can do something about it next. Kind of the definition of a rule, right? Or at least a time-based or a conditional-based rule.
That's the essence of what we try to help people do. There's more to it than just making the rule, though, because usually we find that what underlies a conscious pig party is some lack of self-care leading up to it, so that the pig's voice gets a lot louder. You can think of the pig as the reptilian brain, the seat of the feast and famine response, the seat of the fight or flight response, and it becomes much more active when the body perceives there to be a survival emergency. Our lovely food industry has figured this out, and they know how to stimulate those responses to make those survival needs more active and direct them towards bags and boxes and containers and concentrations of starch and sugar and fat and oil and excitotoxins. Our job is to wrestle ourselves out of those responses. We need to be able to, in the moment, wrestle ourselves out of the perceived emergency, just hand over the chocolate or nobody gets hurt, and move the battleground back to our upper brains where everything that's important to us and our long-term plans and strategies and our relationships and everything like that is important. It turns out that there are a few things that really help with that. Anything that activates the parasympathetic nervous system helps you to move the battleground to your upper brain. So I tell people to taking a deep breath, like breathing in for a count of 7 and breathing out for a count of 11. That will help activate the parasympathetic nervous system and take you out of the emergency response. Carrying around something to write with and writing down the thought in your head that's suggesting that you should break your rule will move the battleground to the upper brain, because writing is a more intellectual upper brain function and binging is a lower brain function. Yoga, going for a walk, unplugging from inputs and decisions. Sometimes people tell me it's impossible, and I say, will your boss follow you to the bathroom? And they kind of laugh and they'll say no. I said, go to the bathroom. Go sit on the toilet for 5 or 10 minutes without your phone and just think. I find that developing that muscle, and it is a muscle, the ability to wrest yourself from the lizard brain at those moments, I find that people have often not eaten enough. Maybe they're trying to make up for a bad day the day before. Maybe they pushed off having lunch, try to add some crunch to your lunch to make it more satisfying. Maybe these are people who complain about this repeatedly, specifically at night. They're usually people who don't like to eat breakfast, and I try to get them to have breakfast and even out their blood sugar throughout the day. There's often an authentic bodily need behind the perceived emergency that quote-unquote causes you to use your free will to reverse your decisions. And the last thing that I find to be really helpful is when people read their rules out loud in the morning, because if you've forgotten your rule, then you won't really hear when the pig says you should break the rule. You need to know where the line is so that you don't cross it. And so the commitment to really nailing that rule into a groove in your brain so that it's abundantly clear when the pig is telling you to cross it, that helps too. So I feel like I lost an important point in there, but those are some smart things that Glenn said.
One of the things I was thinking about, because when I was working with a client who had a rule about this not eating in the evening, then talked about, I had these 2 binges. What were they? He says, it was like hummus and chips. These are things I don't want to eat, and I certainly don't want to eat in the evening. It wasn't that bad. So when I hear that, like whenever I hear a client say, minimizing what they did, I always think they're lying to themselves. And also when a client comes in like atoning, like beating their breast and like, oh my God, I had the worst week ever, I also want to explore that, because that's also usually not true. And they're usually exaggerating and being, dramatically hyperbolic. And so I said, what did that mean? Not that bad. He says, I just had a few. So I asked, well, a few, like, what did that look like? Did you dig in and then just decide to stop at some point, or take me through what's the movie? She said, no, I took the chips and put them in a very small bowl and put it away and didn't have any more. And that's when I started thinking, like, that's really amazing. It wasn't following the rule, but it was certainly conscious. It was certainly an expression of forethought and rational thinking. And at the end, she decided, you know what, I'm going to change the rule. And she did change it to, as you said, like a rule she wanted to follow. And I was thinking, like, that is an expression of free will, even if it's in contradiction to the previous rule.
Yes, and it's a good example of collecting evidence of success. We go to the gym, sometimes we set the bar too high. We go to the gym and we need to give ourselves credit for actually going to the gym, even if we didn't have a great workout. Because it's showing up consistently and staying in the game until you win the game that really defines success. When we look at our success rates, and during the first month we're getting 91% reduction in binge frequency for, and this is very consistent now over 3-4 months of measurements, we get a 91% reduction in binge frequency approximately for the majority of people in the program who engage with the program, the people that write to their email coaches, the people that show up on some of the calls. The people that hide don't get those results. I thought it was really interesting that it's not whether or not someone falls off the wagon that really defines whether they get that success in the long run. It's whether they're committed to showing up and learning from every mistake. I do think that the development of the ability to exercise free will in your own best judgment and your own best interest, I think it's a continuum rather than a light switch. And I think that what you're describing are manifestations of people developing along that continuum. And I think that every time that you try to jump up a level and install a new rule or create a new discipline, that you may find you go through a similar process. I think this is an interesting discussion.
Cool. Certainly helpful for me to think about, like, even, because I really am a strong proponent of holding people accountable, because a 99% success rate will degrade as you multiply 99% by 99%. And so, like, I'm really into not having the slippery slope of imperfection. And at the same time, it's tricky because sometimes failures have seeds of success in them and you want to harvest those.
What you want to do is have a really clear line so you know where the bullseye is. There's a ring around the bullseye. And that way you know what you're shooting at and you know by exactly how much did you miss and in what direction. But if you're playing archery, you get some points for coming close to the bullseye, right? You get some points for hitting the target regardless. You keep aiming at the target, which is bounded by that circle. Even if you missed on the shot before, you still get up and commit with perfection again. The other thing I just want to say about free will before we end the discussion is that I really believe that free will sits on top of discipline. I don't think it's antithetical to discipline. A lot of people think that these rules are going to make them feel restricted and confined. I'll tell people that you couldn't drive around town if it wasn't for the discipline of the engineers who made sure that your wheels turned 30 degrees when you turn the steering wheel to the right, the exact same amount, right? You couldn't drive around town if it wasn't for the discipline of the city traffic planners who figured out where the dangerous intersections were and installed traffic lights and stop signs and yield signs so that it was safe for you to travel around town. I was a jazz pianist in my early days, and I couldn't express my soul freely if I hadn't practiced all the skills. Jim Rohn says a life of discipline is better than a life of regret, and I think that's very true. Peter McWilliams also says you can have anything you want, but you can't have everything you want. I think you put those together, and you're always asking yourself, well, what's the next discipline that's going to provide me with more freedom? I feel the fact that I will never have chocolate again, that I've installed that rule, and I don't even have the rule anymore. It's just become part of my character. The fact that I've become a person who doesn't eat chocolate is immensely freeing. I've got so much more freedom than I could have ever hoped to have while I was a slave to the chocolate bar and had to restrict my life so that I wouldn't see it at Starbucks. I think that freedom sits on top of discipline, and the fact that we are giving up the devil made me do it excuse, which will make you feel better temporarily because it alleviates your sense of guilt or shame, but at a tremendous price and a tremendous restriction of your life. So the devil didn't make me do it. The devil did not make me do it. I'm responsible for my own actions, and I've made bad choices and I've made good choices, but by taking responsibility for them, I've made progressively more good choices.
Yeah, and the way I think about it is that discipline and free will are the same thing when we are unified, right? Like when I'm two different people, when I'm both the pig and the person who wants to lose weight, and I don't realize that there's different parts of the brain at work and they're triggered by different things, and there's the sympathetic and parasympathetic and all that, then I'm constantly bewildered by the fact that I'm breaking my word to myself. It's almost like, those screwball comedies with identical twins, and everyone gets confused that they don't know the same things or they're acting in different ways. To give a nod to kind of the humanistic psychology of the 50s and 60s, I think one of the higher goals, which I think is paradoxical, because the first thing we do is we split ourselves consciously into at least two different entities. But I think the ultimate goal is a unification, so that if I am one person always, and I'm aware of myself and I'm aware of the continuity, then all my discipline is the same as my free will. As you say, like, these are the rules that I love to follow.
Yes. And ultimately, the goal is to live comfortably with the impulses. We are impulsive beings. Our bodies generate very strong biological urges: the urge to mate, the urge to protect our territory, the urge to urinate or defecate. Our bodies generate very, very strong biological urges, and character is the knowledge that you will habitually manage those urges in a civilized way that you're proud of. You make decisions about who you want to become and what you want to do with those impulses. It just becomes a fluid part of you. And so it really is an integration of the animal and the human being in the long run, but we have to be able to distinguish between the animal and the human being in order to build the muscles that allow us to do that.
Right on.
Right on, man.
And that brings us to the end of today's broadcast of Defeat Your Cravings, hosted by Dr. Glenn Livingston. Now, if you'd like to find out more about the products and services Dr. Glenn offers to help you dramatically reduce your cravings and stop overeating in 90 days or less, please visit defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. That's defeatyourcravingscoaching.com. Thanks.